The ballroom shimmered like something out of a dream, golden light spilling from the massive crystal chandeliers and reflecting off the polished marble floor. The soft hum of a live jazz band set a rhythm to the flow of voices and clinking glasses, and servers weaved gracefully through the crowd balancing silver trays of champagne flutes. Emily stood just inside the doorway, her heart pounding faster than the music. She had never been to an event this grand in her life. As a new intern at one of the largest companies in the city, she had been invited almost as an afterthought, a name added to the bottom of the list, and she already felt like an intruder. She smoothed her simple navy blue dress nervously, glancing around at women in elegant gowns and men in tailored suits who moved about with effortless confidence. She clutched her purse like it was her lifeline, wishing she had someone to cling to or at least talk to. But most of the other interns had grouped together earlier, and she had arrived late after spending too long second-guessing what to wear. Now she was alone in a glittering sea of professionals who all seemed to belong. A waiter passed by offering her a drink, but she shook her head quickly, afraid of spilling something on herself and making a fool of her first impression. She just needed to sit down, blend in, and survive the night unnoticed. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for a table that wasn't already full. Most of them had little name cards, but from a distance, she couldn't read them. Toward the front of the room, she noticed a round table with 2 empty chairs, its centerpiece a tall arrangement of white roses and flickering candles. It looked fancier than the others, but she convinced herself it didn't matter. They wouldn't leave it open if it wasn't for everyone, she muttered under her breath, trying to quiet her racing thoughts. Gathering her courage, she walked toward it, her heels clicking awkwardly against the marble. She hesitated for just a second as she reached the table, her stomach twisting with nerves, but when no one stopped her, she pulled the chair back and sat down. The linen felt crisp beneath her fingertips, the silverware gleamed, and the folded napkin looked like it had been sculpted. She exhaled slowly, relieved to have found a spot, and tried to relax her shoulders. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Around her, the conversations at the table were polite but intense, people discussing mergers, international partnerships, and strategy as if it were everyday small talk. Emily smiled faintly and nodded as though she understood, but inside she was lost. She had no idea she was sitting at the VIP table, surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the company. For the moment, though, she simply felt grateful to no longer be standing awkwardly alone, unaware of the storm of embarrassment waiting just around the corner. Emily kept her hands neatly folded in her lap, pretending to listen as the conversations at the table swirled around her. The executives spoke in polished tones about stock performance, quarterly projections, and overseas expansions, words that felt like a foreign language to her. She nodded when someone made eye contact, trying to look engaged even though her heart pounded in her chest. She had only been with the company for 2 weeks, and most of her days were spent filing documents and making coffee runs. Sitting at a table with people who made decisions that shaped the entire future of the company felt surreal, and a little terrifying. Her gaze drifted toward the man sitting across from her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of authority that was impossible to miss. Unlike the others, who laughed occasionally and leaned in to exchange stories, he remained distant, scrolling through his phone every so often with the faintest look of boredom. His suit was sharp, his tie understated, and his presence heavy, as if he didn't need to speak much to dominate the space. Emily felt a flicker of irritation. She leaned ever so slightly toward the woman sitting next to her, a kind-looking executive with pearl earrings and a patient smile. In a hushed voice, Emily whispered, "Honestly, some people are so arrogant. He hasn't even greeted anyone properly. You'd think with all this effort, he could at least act like he's enjoying himself." As soon as the words left her mouth, she regretted them. Her cheeks grew warm, and she bit her lip, wishing she could swallow them back. But the woman beside her simply gave a small chuckle, covering it with a sip of her drink. Emboldened, Emily went on, lowering her voice even further. "I mean, maybe he's important, but that doesn't give him the right to act like he's above everyone else. If I acted like that, I'd be fired in a day." The man across the table glanced up briefly, his eyes sharp, but his expression unreadable. Emily froze, terrified he might have overheard. She quickly busied herself by adjusting her napkin, forcing herself to look away. The rest of the table continued their discussions, and she breathed a sigh of relief, assuming he hadn't caught her remark. Yet she couldn't stop thinking about him. Every time he shifted in his chair or tapped his phone, she noticed He carried himself with a confidence that made her feel both annoyed and strangely intimidated. It never once occurred to her that the man she was so casually criticizing wasn't just another wealthy guest but the very head of the company she worked for. Instead, Emily sat back, still convinced he was nothing more than a rude executive who thought he was too important for pleasantries. The irony of her mistake hung silently over the table, though she remained blissfully unaware, caught between her nervousness and her bold little spark of defiance. Emily tried to shrink into her chair as the evening wore on, silently praying no one would notice how out of place she was. Every so often, laughter erupted at the table when someone shared a clever remark, and she forced herself to smile as though she understood. But in truth, her mind was spinning. The words these executives tossed around so casually, market expansion, strategic alliances, cost optimization, meant little to her. She was just an intern who still got lost trying to find the copy room. The man across from her hadn't changed. He remained calm, detached, sipping his wine occasionally and scanning the room as though the whole affair bored him. Every time his eyes swept past her, Emily felt her pulse race. She couldn't decide if she wanted to disappear or demand why he couldn't at least attempt to look approachable. He intimidated her, and she hated that he knew it. Suddenly, his gaze settled directly on her. The table had gone quiet, and Emily realized too late that the man had asked her something. "And you are." His voice was deep but steady, the kind of tone that seemed to carry weight without trying. Emily blinked, caught off guard. Her throat went dry, and she nearly dropped her fork. I'm Emily," she stammered, forcing a small, awkward smile. "Just, an intern. I work in the marketing department. Only recently joined." She laughed nervously, her voice trembling as she added, "Sorry if I'm a little out of place here." For a moment, silence lingered. A couple of executives smiled politely, one of them even nodding encouragingly as though to say, "Don't worry, we've all been there." But the man who had asked her the question simply studied her with an unreadable expression, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly before he nodded once, slow and deliberate. "You're not out of place," he said calmly. "You're here, aren't you?" Emily's cheeks warmed, and she ducked her head, fiddling with the edge of her napkin. She had expected judgment or even dismissal, but instead, his tone carried no malice. Still, she wished she hadn't drawn attention to herself. The rest of the table resumed their conversation, and Emily tried to fade back into the background. But her thoughts wouldn't settle. Why had he taken notice of her specifically? He had barely spoken to anyone else all night, and yet he had singled her out. Maybe he was trying to test her, or maybe he just found it amusing to make the intern squirm. She kept sneaking glances at him, watching how effortlessly he held himself, how even in silence people seemed to defer to him. She told herself again that he was just another executive too full of himself to care about someone like her. What she didn't know, what she couldn't even imagine, was that this man wasn't simply an executive. He was the CEO, the very person her career depended on. And while she tried desperately to blend in, he was quietly filing away every word she had spoken. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the office building as Emily hurried down the hallway, clutching her notebook tightly to her chest. Her heels clicked nervously against the tile floor. She had barely slept the night before, replaying every awkward moment from the gala in her head. The whispered complaint about the arrogant man, her fumbling introduction, the way he had looked at her like he could see right through her, it all haunted her. She told herself that no one important had heard, that she could just focus on her work and it would all fade away. Today was her first official team briefing, and she wanted to start fresh. The conference room door stood open, and she stepped inside with a deep breath. Her eyes immediately swept across the long polished table. Managers and directors were already seated, shuffling papers and setting down their coffees. At the head of the table, however, sat a man she instantly recognized. The same sharp suit, the same calm, unreadable eyes. Her heart nearly stopped. It was him, the man she had called arrogant. He looked up from his folder as though he had been expecting her. "Good to see you again, Emily," he said evenly, his voice carrying across the room with effortless authority. "I trust you found the gala enjoyable." The blood rushed to her face so fast she thought she might faint. Her legs wobbled as she slipped into a chair, wishing the ground would swallow her whole. He was here, leading the meeting, speaking with the kind of confidence that only came from true power. In that instant, everything clicked, the way others had looked at him with subtle respect, how the table had gone quiet when he spoke, the heavy air of authority he carried. He wasn't just another executive. He was the CEO. Emily's throat tightened. She could barely breathe, let alone respond. The other employees looked at her with mild curiosity, some smiling politely, unaware of the storm raging inside her. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then muttered, "Yes, sir, it was very nice." Her voice cracked, and she bit her lip, heat flooding her cheeks. "Mr." Carter's lips curved into something between a smirk and a smile. He set his pen down, leaned back slightly, and studied her with an expression that wasn't unkind, just amused. "You know," he said, his tone measured, "not many people tell me when I come across as arrogant. It's refreshing, in a way." Laughter rippled softly around the table. Emily wanted to sink under it, but something in his eyes told her he wasn't angry. He was teasing, yes, but there was a hint of respect there too. She forced a shaky smile, gripping her pen as though it could anchor her to the moment. As the meeting continued, Emily sat quietly, still trembling from embarrassment but oddly relieved. She hadn't been fired on the spot. Instead, she had done something few dared to do, spoken her mind in front of the most powerful man in the company. And somehow, against all odds, it seemed she had earned a place in his memory.